Hi everyone, this is Yana Smakula and welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since I last used my favorite colored pencils from Faber Castell, so for today's video I decided to do some pencil coloring for a one-layer floral card featuring stamps from Gina K Designs. Here I have the Tropical Blooms stamps and I'm going to be using this beautiful floral cluster to create my card. I picked this particular image because of its size and the amount of white or open space. Whenever I do pencil coloring, I make sure that my image is large enough and not too tiny so that I cannot do any coloring. I want it to be large enough so that I can actually do some color blending. I've already placed this image onto a panel of craft paper, and this is Desert Storm cardstock by Yana. This is the 80-pound version, and I'm going to do my stamping first. Next, we'll do the image coloring, and then we'll heat emboss this image outline in gold. I'm using Versamark ink for my initial stamping. This is a watermark ink, so that means it will leave a watermark impression on my paper once it is dry. And this is what I need for my coloring. I need my stamped image to have a line to be able to color, to be able to see and color, but I also need that line to be fairly faint. I'm using my stamp platform today, and for this technique, where you stamp first, then color, and then heat emboss the image, you do need to use a stamp positioning tool. It doesn't matter if that's a MISTI or a stamp platform or some other tool, as long as you're able to re-stamp the same image in the same place. I'm going to flip my paper and stamp the same image in the opposite corner of my panel. You can at this point go to the coloring part, and once you're done coloring, heat emboss the image outline and then remove the stamp from the door of your stamping tool and reposition it in another spot if you don't want to have a mirrored image on your panel. But I actually like this mirrored look, so I'm flipping my paper, and without moving the stamp, I'm stamping it in the opposite corner. My stamping is done for now, and I'm going to set my stamping tool aside. And I am keeping the stamp in the tool. Notice that I'm not removing it. And this is very important. I'm going to use my all-time favorite pencils for coloring today. These are POLYCHROMOS pencils by Faber Castell. I've had them for about 2 years now, and I absolutely love them. I started with a smaller 36 pencil set, and now I have about 70 pencils in my collection. To me, pencil coloring is always more time consuming than Copic marker coloring, so I usually save it for a special occasion. This birthday card that I'm making today is going to go to my aunt, so I think this is pretty special. I have a chart for my pencils. I've downloaded this from the Faber Castell website. I printed it onto thin printer paper as my printer doesn't really take other kinds of paper, and I swatched all of the pencils that I have. This chart is very helpful when picking out colors of pencils that I want to use for my coloring, although I am guilty of using the same colors over and over again. I'm going with just a handful of colors here. I don't really need a ton. I have pink Madder Lake, fuchsia, and white, and I will use these to color my flowers, and May Green along with a chromium green opaque to color the leaves, and I will pull that darker green pencil later. I was just having trouble finding it at that moment. So let's zoom in and start on our coloring. I'm going to do simple coloring with minimum blending. This particular paper, Desert Storm from Yana, doesn't have enough tooth for my taste, so it's not the best paper for lots of layering, but it is a good paper to do some basic coloring. When coloring with colored pencils, you'll also need to have a pencil sharpener ready by your side to sharpen these pencils often. I like it when my pencils have a sharp to medium tip when I'm coloring, especially when I color tiny details such on that rosebud. What I love about the POLYCHROMOS pencils is that they do not break when you sharpen them. I use a cheap pencil sharpener and they sharpen wonderfully every single time. I did just a basic coat of light green for the leaves, and now I'm adding just a hint of shading using a darker green. You don't need to go crazy here to do a ton of blending because this image already has gorgeous detail to it, and the image illustration itself does a lot of the work for you. So there's no need to spend hours coloring this and adding shadows and highlights, as an outline image, once applied, will add that in for you. And speaking of time, I think this one took me about an hour to color, maybe an hour and a half, so fairly quickly. And that's all because I wasn't spending a ton of time doing blending and shading, as I knew that I would be adding that outline and gold embossing powder. The way this floral cluster is illustrated, you have little shaded areas that tell you where you need to apply the darkest color. So this is very helpful if you're not sure how to color. For the most part, I started with the darkest pencil for each petal. Next, I added a medium pencil and finished it off with white. You can also lay down white pencil as a base layer for your image, and it will lighten up the entire section. This is a good trick to use if you do not have enough colors. You can use white to substitute for the lightest color, and you can also use a gray pencil to substitute for the darkest color. Also, if you're not sure about the stamped lines, sometimes it's a bit hard to make out how that particular petal actually looks, so it's helpful to bring in the stamp set and look at the image on the packaging, especially for those smaller petals in the center of the flower. You'll notice that I'm coloring in little flick motions. I'm not going for a seamless blend here. Rather, I want to have visible flicks of color, especially the darkest and the medium. And these flicks sort of, mimic the veins on the flower petals, I would say. I finished coloring these two first stamped clusters, and now it's time to go back to our stamping tool and add that gold heat embossed outline to those. If you like the no-line coloring look, you can actually keep these as is, maybe add a little bit more detail with the pencils, and you can have your card done quicker. I love the look of gold embossing, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm using my anti-static powder tool, and this is crucial here. I've touched this panel numerous times with my fingers, and it's important to neutralize all of those oils from the skin to have a nice and clean embossing. I actually like to tap some powder onto my image, and next I use a wide flat brush to distribute the powder evenly. I saw Debbie Hughes show this in one of her videos, and I thought that it was a really great idea. Next, I'm inking my image up with Versamark ink and stamping it onto my panel. I double check to make sure that nothing moved, as this part is super important. You want everything to line up perfectly unless you actually want to have an offset look, which I've done in the past, and it does look awesome as well. But here I want my gold embossed outline to line up perfectly with the colored image. I stamped this onto both corners, and it's time to add that gold embossing powder. I'm using embossing powder from Hero Arts, and I'm just going to preheat my heat tool and melt it. I know that I will be doing more of this stamping, coloring, and heat embossing, so it's very important for my panel to warp as little as possible. So I'm being very cautious here, and I'm trying not to overheat the paper to eliminate or minimize warping. Here is a close-up of how this looks, and I'm already loving it. Okay, time to do more stamping. So now basically we are just repeating the steps to add more images and more coloring to this panel. I want to have more flowers here, so I'm stamping a few more. I completed my coloring. I skipped filming that part as it was repetitive. And now I'm just once again going to heat emboss these outlines in gold. Again, I made sure to use anti-static powder and double check to make sure that things line up. And here's what this background now looks like. I say this is a one layer of gorgeous. For my sentiment, I'm going to use this beautiful Happy Birthday to You stamp from the Scripty Sayings 1 stamp set. And again, I'm going to heat emboss it in gold in the center of my panel. Now, I wasn't quite sure which stamp I wanted to use for my sentiment, so I didn't stamp it to begin with. But usually when making backgrounds like this, where the sentiment is actually a part of a background, it is best to do the sentiment first and then everything else later, as later you might simply not have the space for the sentiment. Okay, I want to add a bit more watermark stamping to my background, just stamping, no coloring this time. So I've die cut masks for my image using a coordinating die, and I also used Simon's masking paper, and I just ran it through my Spellbinders Platinum die cutting machine, and I have 2 masks here. I'm masking one section of this background at a time, and I'm going to stamp the same image cluster over my already stamped and colored sections. I have the masks in place, so they are protecting my images, and now I'm simply adding additional imagery to the background of this card. I'm actually going to repeat this quite a few times to add a ton of stamping to the background. It won't show much as it is stamped in watermark ink, but it will help fill this floral background in and make it look like a one seamless piece. I adhered my background onto an A2 white card base, and now I'm just adding a couple of sparkling clear jewels from Pretty Pink Bosch to dress this card up. I love to add some sparkle to my cards, and I feel like these jewels fit the bill perfectly for this particular project. Finally, I decided to make an envelope liner for an envelope for this card. I shared one recently and I got a few questions if I used a die for that, so I thought I would show you how I made it. There are dies out there to make envelope liners, but I cut mine out using scissors. So here I have an envelope that I want to use for this card. This one is by Simon Says Stamp. I placed it over a sheet of Neenah Solar White cardstock. This is 80-pound cardstock, so thinner paper. And I traced around it with a pencil. I'm going to use a combination of my paper trimmer and scissors to cut this liner out. You will also need to slim it down a little bit a couple of times to fit the envelope, but really it is super easy to make. Once my envelope liner shape was ready, I just stamped and heat embossed a few floral clusters in gold embossing powder, and my liner was done. So here's what this card looks together with the envelope with a coordinating envelope liner. I hope you guys enjoyed this card making idea and will give it a try using these or other stamps from your stash. Be sure to visit my blog for a full list of supplies I used to make this card. Thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, as always, leave them in the comments section below, and be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet done so. If you are a subscriber but are not receiving new video notifications, check the bell icon on the homepage of my channel to get notified every time there's a new video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!